So let's look at the cause of this stress and dissatisfaction in our lives. So, as a precursor, all of these forms of mental distress, like suffering, stress, and just baseline dissatisfaction or anxiety in life, can be called a single term called dukkha, which is a Pali or Sanskrit term. So, in short, the cause for dukkha is a cause and effect. It's not a magical thing or a curse. It's a cause and effect similar to a natural process, how like gravity is. At a mundane level, you can say that the cause is your mind craving for something to be available in a larger quantity, or being aversive to something that cannot be lessened. But let's try and see this from a far more deeper level. Now, I'll try and explain this stress making process using phenomenology, or basically how it would appear to you in your own subjective universe or subjective experience. So, let's dive in. In this model, the world you see or feel right now is a 3D space of awareness, which isn't a thing but a process. And it has all of these different phenomena happening in it. Also, as a side note, all of these things that I'll describe and this process can be observed by you yourself. In fact, I recommend it. But for now, you'll probably need to sort of be open minded about it and accept this as a model. However, you will soon be able to see all of these sub processes that I described, and maybe even for now, you can see some of these sub processes that I describe here. That's pretty much because it's this entire chain or this entire process is universal to pretty much all humans and probably all sentient beings as well. So, the first sub process or link that I'll explain for now is your mind producing this thing, or better yet, a process called attention, which it uses to focus on objects and then understand them conceptually. This attention is similar to how we normally use the word, hey, pay attention to whatever's on the blackboard. Now, subjectively, I feel it almost like this arrow or a flashlight like phenomena that's emerging from somewhere in my head, like behind my eyes, and then going on to fall onto these objects that are being observed. When it checks out this phenomena or these objects in my awareness, it almost automatically gives rise to this duality of subject object. And this is where the problems sort of start, as we'll later see. This duality causes this sort of weird feeling of being an observer inside your head, which for now you probably take it for granted. This feeling of being a separate, distinct, permanent self or me inside the head is sort of made up of this observer feeling, and it's basically fake or made up, as you'll later see as well. Now, the job of attention is to fall on an object, and based on that, it produces the next link, which is conceptual information. So, it produces labeling or based on past associations, it produces certain mental images or perceptions. For example, if it falls on a sound outside your window, it'll understand that, hey, it's coming from a motorbike or a car. And then it'll sort of produce a mental image of someone riding that motorbike, maybe a couple or a biker gang. This is based on your preconditioning. Then it produces the next link or the next sub process, which is feeling. So, this feeling can be pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant. Let's deal with pleasant or unpleasant for now. And this is based on your past memories or associations, conditionings as well. For example, if in your mental image you saw a biker gang, you might feel that as an unpleasant feeling in your chest. Or if you think biker gangs are cool, then you'll probably have a pleasant feeling. Again, this feeling phenomena sort of seems to be localized around my chest area for me. But now, next, the main problem sort of starts. And this problem stems from how attention was created itself, or how attention exists as it is. Now, this attention comes with a sense of self or observer embedded in it. And this causes our evolutionary drive to kick in. This is because, from a point of view of biology, sentient beings, for example, insects, animals, humans, depend on this sense of self to survive. It causes them to be aversive to danger and to also try and collect as many resources as they can to ensure survival. But you, as someone who has gained a lot of knowledge since your childhood, probably doesn't need this evolutionary trait just to survive and to make logical decisions. You know that you need to eat food and drink water in order to survive. You know that you shouldn't hug a snake if it's really angry. Anyway, the fact that your attention carries this flavor of self or I am causes your attention to crave more of whatever is pleasant and run away from unpleasant objects. You would have noticed, if you've ever been studying and you're trying to focus on a book, but you keep getting distracted from a nice piece of music that's in the background, you'll notice that your attention sort of runs away towards that nice piece of music. Or if it is unpleasant, then your mind almost physically cringes or recoils away from it. It sort of feels like you're tucking your chin in away from that piece of music. So the process of craving and aversion are just two sides of the same coin, and they will kick in the next process if they aren't stopped within a couple of seconds. So this craving process that we just saw leads to the next link, which is clinging, where your attention sort of feels like it's sticking to the object, or it's running way too far away from that object if it's aversive. Either way, there is this sort of weird lock-in mechanism that seems to happen in relation to that object. It almost feels like, and almost like, your base of attention inside your head or behind your eyes is tightening up almost weirdly. Like there's this buildup of tension there, almost like it's being pulled into something. This also, at a more mundane level, feels like there's an obsession that's happening in your head or in your mind. For example, you might be lost deep into thoughts. Next, after a few seconds of this, comes the next link, which can be called reaction or reactive action, or maybe better yet, reactive intention. This can be bodily, verbal, or a mental reaction. For example, you start getting thoughts about, oh, why does my neighbor insist on playing this music at this hour? Or something along those lines. Or you probably want to say something and shout at the neighbor. Or worse yet, you probably just want to get up and shut down the power to that neighbor's house. So, this acting out of clinging is what I call reactive intention, or just reaction. And the type or the intensity of the reaction depends on your current mental state, which we'll discuss later. Uh, Along with this comes this increase in stress and dukkha as well. So while you're starting to react and these thoughts are happening on your own, stress and dukkha starts building up underneath almost magically and in parallel. Now, this is important. So, even if you are greedily reacting to something and obsessing over something, which feels nice in the moment, or if you're being angry, which also sort of feels nice because it feels righteous in that short duration, underneath all that, the stress level or the dukkha is constantly increasing, even if you aren't aware of it. And once that sort of short term allure goes away, you are soon left with this super increase in stress, this sort of raw feeling in your chest, and the feeling of heightened unease or anything along those lines. Now, like every link before this or every sub process before this sub process can lead to the next sub process to rise as well if it isn't stopped in time. let's say 2 or 3 seconds. Now, I like to think of this link almost like an RPM meter or a tachometer or even a pressure gauge in action. And the feeling that I get from how I tell that this link is going on is around my head, so the sides of my head. Now, taking that example of an RPM sort of meter in a auto transmission car, in an automatic car, um, let's imagine the RPM meter goes from 0 to 6,000. If the pressure builds up, or if the RPM sort of build up and reach 6,000, the gear automatically changes and increases. Similarly, if this reaction isn't stopped in time, the pressure sort of builds up, so and I can feel that around my head, and then suddenly it sort of connects at the top of my head, and there's this shift or this lock in, and then the next link starts. And this next link is the worst of all of these. Now, since this video is probably getting too long, we'll look at the next link, the most painful link, in the next video. Along with that, we'll look at the precursor to the first link that we discussed, the attention. So attention is also dependent on causes and conditions, and we'll look at that in the next video. But in summary, until now, I hope this process sort of gives you an insight into why the default mode of operation of most people in this world, the default philosophy that most people hold, hedonism, doesn't really work as well. Hedonism is seeking of pleasure. So, in terms of phenomena, like how we just discussed, it's your attention trying to find pleasure through pleasant objects. And that accidentally leads to clinging to these objects as well. It feels nice in the short term, but since these objects are impermanent, it causes a pleasure that's very impermanent as well. And it doesn't really lead to a happier, more content, peaceful state either. And worst of all, after this short term pleasure goes away, the stress that was being built up underneath all of it reveals its ugly head.